That afternoon, Seattle was dressed in a faded autumn coat, the kind that made the air smell of rain and nostalgia. The drizzle fell softly, brushing against the hair of passers-by like a fleeting touch. Amid the city's restless hum, there was a small cafe tucked away on Fifth Avenue, a quiet corner where the scent of coffee mingled with mist and the sound of old jazz drifted gently through the hurried crowd. By the window sat a woman, silent and still. Her fingers traced the rim of a cappuccino long gone cold. Her name was Elena Brooks, 32, a part-time art teacher and painter, still struggling to finish the canvases that never seemed complete. Her beauty wasn't the striking kind, but the quiet, aching kind, like rain that had forgotten how to stop. On the table lay an open sketchbook. Half-drawn lines formed the face of a man, a faint smile, gentle eyes, left unfinished. For reasons she couldn't explain, she had been sketching that same face for 10 years. The man who once made her believe that love could change the world. Liam Carter. She took a sip of her coffee, trying to chase the memory away. 10 years had passed. She was no longer that 19-year-old girl, the dreamer who believed love alone could keep someone from leaving. Life had taught her otherwise. Love by itself was never enough. The door chime rang softly. A man walked in, rain still glistening in his hair, a gray overcoat draped across his tall frame. His steps were unhurried, yet deliberate. He chose the corner seat, where the warm lamplight caught his face, and when he looked up, his gaze stopped. He saw her, the girl he had once promised to return to, when he had everything. But he had disappeared, taking her youth with him. Liam Carter was no longer the penniless student she once knew. He was now the CEO of Carter Enterprises, a name Seattle's financial world spoke with reverence. He had built an empire from a 20-square-meter apartment, surviving on instant noodles for 2 years, and had been turned down by investor after investor. But now he was a billionaire, and sitting only a few steps away was his past. Elena didn't notice. She still sat by the window, a fragment of time the world had forgotten. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned a new page. And there it was again, his face blurred by memory but never erased. Liam watched her, a faint smile crossing his lips, one sadder than the rain sliding down the glass. 10 years, enough to gain everything, except what mattered most. He had thought that when success came, he would find her again. But standing at the summit, he no longer knew where to begin, because time may dull everything, except the feeling of seeing her eyes again. He didn't approach, didn't call her name. He just sat there, afraid that a single word might awaken the past. A gust of wind slipped through the door, sending a page of her sketchbook fluttering to the floor. Liam bent to pick it up, and when he looked up, their eyes met. In that instant, the world seemed to stop. The sound of rain, the music, the clinking of spoons, all faded away. There were only two eyes, two souls, and a flood of memories rushing back. She froze, her lips trembling, her heartbeat wild. Then a voice, deep, warm, achingly familiar, broke the silence. "Elena, is that you?" She didn't answer right away. Between them hung the rich scent of coffee and the quiet stretch of 10 lost years. Then with a shaky smile, she whispered, "Liam, really?" He nodded. His gaze was the same, only now it held something time could never erase. Longing, regret, and a promise left unkept. The rain outside kept falling, but inside the cafe, another kind of rain had begun. The quiet storm behind the eyes of two people who had once been each other's whole world. Liam sat down across from her, a soft smile touching his lips. "You still like the seat by the window, huh?" Elena smiled faintly and shook her head. "Because from here, fewer people can see I'm lonely." The words struck something deep in him. In 10 years, he had signed hundreds of contracts, spoken on countless stages, stood under the dazzling lights of success. Yet not once had his heart trembled the way it did now. She had changed. The same voice, the same eyes, but quieter now, heavier somehow. No longer the 19-year-old girl who dreamed of painting on balconies, wind tangling her hair, laughter spilling into the sunlight. Before him sat a woman who had learned to live with reality on her shoulders. "Where were you all that time?" she asked softly, as if afraid the answer might break something fragile. He exhaled, his eyes dropping to his hands. "I had to find myself, and maybe I went too far." She gave a small, awkward smile. "Did you find him?" "I think I did, but there's no one left to share it with." A long silence, only the soft drumming of rain on the glass, echoing memories of the past. Elena changed the subject, perhaps to escape it. "Do you still draw?" He chuckled. "No, these days, I only draw financial charts." She laughed too, but the sound faded quickly. "I still paint, but now I just teach kids. Haven't sold a painting in years." Her tone was light, but there was a tremor beneath it, like something unsaid. Liam said nothing. He knew her too well. She had never stopped believing in art, in beauty, even when the world had stopped believing in dreamers. He looked at the cup between them, thin steam curling like a fragile bridge. "You still drink cappuccino, no sugar." She blinked. "You remember that?" "I remember everything." The way he said it made her eyes quiver, as though something had brushed the deepest corner of her heart. 10 years. He had walked through boardrooms, sleepless nights, billion-dollar deals, but nowhere had ever felt as calm as this. Just sitting across from her, hearing her laugh, even if only faintly. "So, what do you do now?" she asked. He hesitated for a moment before replying, his tone casual. "Investment. Just a small company." She nodded, not pressing further. Wealth had never mattered to Elena. She had loved him once, not for his ambition, but because even in failure, he still believed in tomorrow. Outside, the rain began to ease. Sunset light spilled through the window, painting her face in gold. "Elena," he said quietly, "you know, some people, no matter how much time passes, I still can't forget." She met his gaze and smiled faintly. "And some people, Liam, we don't forget either. We just stop being brave enough to start again." The moment hung between them. No more words, but inside an entire decade came rushing back. Rainy afternoons, half-finished dreams, and that old promise. "I'll come back when I'm good enough for you." He had come back, but she was no longer that girl, and he was no longer the boy afraid of losing her. She stood up. "I have to go. My students are waiting." He nodded, watching her quietly. She slipped on her old coat, picked up her brown umbrella, and walked into the rain. Small, fragile, but unyielding. He remained seated in the cafe that was his own. He had built it, not to make money, but to keep a memory alive. The cafe they had once dreamed of opening together. Staring out the window as the rain began again, he whispered to himself, "You're gone now, but I think I'm still sitting in that same moment. The day you left, and I couldn't tell you that I never stopped loving you." That day it rained again. Seattle never really stopped raining, as if the city itself kept a secret within its storms. Elena had just finished teaching, her old brown umbrella tilted over half her face. She hurried through the wet streets toward the familiar bus stop, but the bus never came. She waited as the rain grew heavier. Then a black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. That voice, low, calm, unmistakably familiar. "Get in. You'll get soaked out here." She froze. Liam. His eyes were still warm, steady. Yet there was something unreadable in them now. She hesitated. 10 years ago she had walked out of his life without looking back, and now he appeared again, quietly as if summoned by the rain. "Thanks, but I'm fine," she said. He looked at her drenched coat and smiled slightly. "Fine?" "You're shaking." She bit her lip. Part of her wanted to refuse. Another part wanted to stay. Finally, she opened the door. "Just for a short ride." The car rolled through the gray rain. Silence filled the air, broken only by the rhythmic wipers. Elena looked out the window, while Liam stole glances at her in the rearview mirror. He remembered everything. How she tucked her hair when shy, how she looked away when moved, how she bit her lip when lost in thought. 10 years hadn't changed a thing. You still teach at the Arts Center? He asked. She nodded, her eyes brightening a little. Yes, it's small, but the kids are wonderful. I feel useful. I believe that, he said with a smile. She laughed softly. That's funny. You never believed in art before. I do now. Because you never stopped. A comfortable silence followed. The car stopped in front of her old apartment. She turned to him. Thanks for the ride. He looked at the faded building, the rusted staircase, and felt something tighten inside him. He had everything, and she was still walking home in worn shoes, under the rain. Before she stepped out, he called out softly, Elena. She turned. Are you free tomorrow? I'd like to take you to dinner. She hesitated, her eyes glimmering under the streetlight. Dinner? 10 years and you still think I'm that easy to convince? He smiled. No, I just hope you're still a little curious. She was silent for a few seconds, then said quietly, I teach an evening class, but I'm free in the afternoon. I'll pick you up, he said gently. The next day he arrived early. She wore a simple beige dress, her hair tied back neatly. No makeup, just that quiet, graceful beauty that time couldn't touch. They dined at a small restaurant by the lake, where golden lights shimmered on the water. It was peaceful, almost like the world had slowed just for them. They talked about the years gone by, about dreams, about what they'd lost. Elena said softly, You know, I used to think, if I'd stayed, maybe you wouldn't have tried so hard to succeed. He looked at her, his voice low. No, if you'd stayed, I wouldn't have lost everything. But I also wouldn't have known what truly mattered. They both laughed, a warm, bittersweet sound, like two souls seeing themselves in the mirror of time. After dinner, they walked along the lake. The breeze was cool, the sunset falling on her shoulders. It's strange, she murmured. After all this time, it doesn't feel like we've been apart. Because some people, he replied, no matter how many years pass, are only ever one glance away. They stopped by the wooden railing. She studied him quietly. What do you really do, Liam? You seem different, calmer, like there's something I can't quite see. He looked into the distance, his voice deepening. I invest. A bit in technology and a bit in people. She smiled. That sounds vague. Sometimes the most important things don't need to be understood, as long as you know why you're doing them. She didn't know that the art center where she taught was part of the Carter Foundation, and that the man standing beside her was the one who had quietly funded it for years. He had helped her all along, silently, without name or thanks. Because for him, knowing she still painted, still lived, still smiled, was enough. That night, he drove her home. As she stepped out, she turned and said softly, Thank you for tonight. I feel a little younger. He smiled, voice low and tender. And I feel alive again. She walked away, her figure fading beneath the streetlights, and he stood there, in the rain once more, watching her go, afraid of losing her all over again. The next morning was cold and clear. Elena woke earlier than usual, opened her window and gazed at the quiet street still veiled in morning mist. On her table, a cup of coffee steamed softly beside her sketchbook. She sat down and began to draw again. His face. This time her strokes were slower, gentler, as if something inside her had begun to awaken. For 10 years she had never imagined seeing him again, and even less, that her heart could still tremble the way it did the first time. She replayed last night in her mind. His voice, his gaze, the silences between them. There are kinds of silence that speak louder than words. One glance is enough to say everything. Yet what lingered most was the sense that he was hiding something. She didn't know what he did for a living now. Why had he become so private? Or why he had reappeared just when she thought she had finally let him go? That day at school, while cleaning her desk, she found a thick envelope in the office cabinet. On it were the words, Special Grant, Carter Foundation. Elena froze. She knew that name, a prestigious organization that supported art and education projects. Her school had received funding from them for years, and it was thanks to that funding that she was still able to keep her job. Curious, she opened the file. Between administrative forms lay a signed document. In the lower corner, small initials read, LC. Elena's breath caught. LC, Liam Carter. No, it couldn't be. But as she sat there, pieces began to fall into place. How did he know exactly where she worked? How he never asked much, only listened. As he'd said, I invest in people. Everything made sense now. He wasn't just a man from her past. He had been quietly helping her all along, for years without a word. That afternoon after class, she didn't go home. Instead, she went back to the cafe, the place where they had met again. Liam was there, sitting in the same corner, reading through some papers. When he saw her, he looked up and smiled. That same calm, gentle smile. You're early. I thought you'd come. You really believe that? I believe in what used to be true. She sat down, meeting his gaze squarely. I have something to ask you, and you have to tell me the truth. He said nothing. She placed the file on the table, the Carter Foundation logo glinting under the cafe light. This foundation, it's yours, isn't it? He didn't answer right away. Just looked at her, eyes deep and steady. After a few seconds, he nodded. The air between them grew heavy. She gave a faint, trembling smile, her eyes glassy with tears. You've been helping me all these years? I wasn't helping, he said quietly. I was just keeping a promise. What promise? That I'd come back and do everything I could to make sure you'd keep painting. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She hadn't expected him to remember that night, the words they'd whispered in a tiny room full of dreams. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. He sighed, voice soft as the rain that had begun to fall outside. Because I was afraid you'd think I was trying to buy back the past. Her eyes shimmered, her voice breaking. You fool. I never needed your money. I just needed to know you still remembered me. They sat in silence. Rain cascaded down the glass roof, and the cafe lights shimmered on their faces. After so many years, here they were again. No longer a poor dreamer and a hopeful girl, but two souls who had walked through loss and regret, finally learning to speak the words they once left unspoken. He reached for her hand gently. I never forgot you, Elena. Not for a single day, she bit her lip, tears falling freely now. You know, there were years when I drew you hundreds of times. I just stopped saying your name. He gave a wistful smile, brushing a tear from her cheek. You haven't forgotten. That's enough. As for me, I'm still here, just like I promised. The rain slowed. A faint beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the windowpane. She looked at him, eyes trembling between joy and fear. Liam, if I wanted to start over now, is it too late? He smiled softly, his hand still wrapped around hers. It's never too late, Elena. As long as our hearts still beat for each other, there's always a way back. That night after leaving the cafe, Elena didn't go straight home. She walked along the riverside street, where golden reflections from the lamps danced across the water. The rain had stopped, but inside her, storms still raged. Each step felt like walking through memories, the kind that never truly fade. She didn't know whether to be angry, to cry, or to smile. The man she had once loved, the man she thought was gone forever, had been silently supporting her life for years, not out of pity, not out of guilt, but simply out of love. Elena stopped at the small bridge spanning the river. The cold wind brushed past, carrying the scent of water. Then a familiar voice came from behind her. I thought I'd find you here. She turned. Liam stood there, still in his gray coat, his eyes soft as moonlight on the river's surface. You followed me? She asked, half teasing, half trembling. No, I just didn't want to leave you alone. She fell silent. Inside her, emotions swirled. Regret, tenderness, gratitude, and love. A kind of love that had been sleeping for years, now stirring again, slower, deeper, more real than before. He stepped closer and draped his coat over her shoulders. It's cold tonight. I'm fine. I know, but I still want to keep you warm. She looked up at him, voice unsteady. You've changed so much. You never used to say things like that. He chuckled softly, half playful, half sincere. Back then, all I had was pride. Now, I'm just afraid of hurting the one who once loved me most. They stood by the bridge railing, watching the river flow beneath them. Elena spoke quietly. Liam, I used to think I'd stop believing in love. After you left, everything inside me just closed. He listened in silence, not interrupting. But today, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, seeing you again made me realize. Maybe love never disappears. It just changes shape. Quieter, older, but still there. Liam turned to her, his eyes deep, steady. Elena, I've met many people, seen so many things, but nothing ever felt enough. Only when I saw you again did I remember where home was. She laughed through tears. 10 years ago I used to dream that if we ever met again, I'd just want to sit beside you in the rain. No words, just to know. It was real, he smiled, eyes glinting with that gentle sadness. And now the rain stopped. But I still want to sit with you, not to remember, but to begin. She looked up at him, uncertain. Begin? Yes, to start over, not from where we ended, but from where we should have begun. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. The project plan for Carter Art Center, where she taught. At the bottom in fresh ink were the words, Art Director, Elena Brooks. She froze, eyes wide. Liam, you're joking, right? He shook his head. No, I don't want you to just teach. I want you to create, to lead, to live the life you were meant to live. Tears welled up, but this time they were tears of joy. You don't owe me anything, Liam. You don't have to do this. He looked at her with quiet conviction. I'm not doing this because I owe you. I'm doing it because it was our dream, and because once I broke my promise. Today I just want to keep it, not for you, but for myself. She stepped forward and hugged him. At first it was light, hesitant, then tighter, as if letting go would make everything vanish again. He stood still, one hand resting on her back, and for that moment, the world simply stopped. The narrator's voice softened, heavy with feeling. 10 years. They walked two separate paths only to meet again, where both had learned what love truly means. Not in desire or possession, but in forgiveness. Because sometimes love doesn't have to return in flames and fireworks. Sometimes its quiet peace is proof enough that it never really left. Elena lifted her head, her voice trembling but serene. Thank you for keeping your promise, even 10 years late. Liam smiled. I didn't keep it. I just finally found my way back to you. A week later, Elena received an envelope, an elegant ivory card sealed with gold. It was from the Carter Foundation, a name she had only ever seen printed on the grant forms that funded her art school. The embossed letters curved gracefully across the invitation. You are cordially invited to the Carter Foundation Art Gala, an evening honoring those who keep the flame of creativity alive. She read it again and again, her heart pounded. Carter. That name instantly pulled her thoughts toward him. Liam Carter. Standing before the mirror, she hesitated before slipping into a simple sky blue dress. It wasn't glamorous, not expensive, but it was the same dress she had once imagined in her sketches. Gentle, pure, and sincere. She whispered to herself, I'm just going to attend, not to draw attention, not to see him, but deep down, she knew. A small part of her still hoped he would be there. The gala took place in a grand glass building downtown. Lights glittered across the ceiling like constellations, and the soft melody of a piano floated through the air. Elena stepped inside, surrounded by artists, entrepreneurs, and patrons in elegant attire. For a moment she felt small, a quiet soul in a world that seemed too dazzling. Then the MC's voice rose through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder of the Carter Foundation, Mr. Liam Carter. Applause filled the room. Elena froze. Her breath caught. The spotlight swept across the stage, and there he was, in a black suit, standing tall, confident, and calm. It was him. No longer the quiet man in a cafe, but Liam Carter, billionaire, philanthropist, and the face of success. He took the microphone. His voice was deep, steady, and full of warmth. 10 years ago, I was a man with nothing, except a dream, and someone who believed in me when no one else would. The room fell silent. He paused, and his eyes found her. Right there, in the middle row, where she sat frozen. That person taught me that success isn't about having everything, but about keeping kindness, even after losing everything. And tonight, if I can give back to others, it's only because once someone helped me believe the world could still be good. The hall was silent, completely still. Elena's vision blurred with tears. She didn't need to guess who he was talking about. It was her, the girl who had believed in him when he was nothing, and now he was returning that faith in the most beautiful way possible. When his speech ended, the audience erupted in applause. He bowed, thanked them, then stepped down from the stage, and among the glittering crowd, he walked straight toward her. "Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "for not telling you sooner." "You're the founder?" He nodded. "Yes, but more importantly, I'm the man who owes you a thank you." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "You don't owe me anything, Liam. If I had stayed, maybe you wouldn't have become who you are." He shook his head. "No, because you left, I learned how to stand. You left, but you never left me. You're the reason I became this man." Her tears fell freely now. In that glittering ballroom, surrounded by power and prestige, there were only two people. One who had once lost everything, and one who had once believed when no one else did. Now they stood face to face, not as who they used to be, but as who they had become. Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out a small frame sketch. It was her drawing, a portrait of him from 10 years ago. "I kept this all these years," he said quietly. "I bought it at a small exhibition once. You had signed it anonymously." Elena gasped, her hand trembling. You kept it for 10 years? "Yes," he said, "because I was afraid to forget. Afraid that if I ever forgot this face, I'd forget the man who learned to believe in goodness because of you." She couldn't speak. He took her hand, firm but tender. "Elena, if you'll let me, I want to make up for those 10 lost years. Not with money, not with success, but with the rest of my life." She looked up at him, tears glistening like starlight. "Are you sure? You're Liam Carter, the man the whole world knows, and I'm just a simple art teacher." He smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "I don't need the world. I just need the one person who saw me when the world turned away." The band began to play a slow jazz tune, the same kind she used to love. Under the soft golden lights and the sound of distant applause, they stood together, two souls who had wandered far, finally finding their way home. And as he leaned close, his voice brushed her ear like a promise reborn. "Thank you for not forgetting me and for letting me love you all over again." The next morning, Seattle woke to sunlight. No rain, no mist. Only warm light slipping through glass windows, spilling softly over the half-finished painting on the easel. Elena sat in her small apartment, the same old desk, the same chipped mug of coffee. Yet somehow, everything felt different. Outside, birds were singing. Inside, there was peace. Before her was a painting, two figures sitting by a cafe window, rain falling faintly beyond the glass. Their faces were undefined, only light traced through the scene, gentle and quiet. In the corner of the canvas, she wrote a small title in cursive, "Second Chances." It was the first painting she'd completed in years, not for sale, not for commission, but simply to capture the moment she realized that love could return, even if late. A knock sounded at the door. When she opened it, Liam stood there. No suit, no polished facade, just a man in a white shirt holding two steaming cups of coffee. "I figured you still liked this kind," he said. She smiled. "No sugar, extra milk. You remember everything." He smiled back, his eyes glowing softly. I remember every little thing about you. They sat by the window, sunlight wrapping around them. No questions, no heavy past, just the warmth of now, simple and real. Elena whispered, "It still feels unreal, like I'm in a dream, and dreams. They end so quickly." He set down his cup, reached for her hand. "This isn't a dream, Elena. It just took us 10 years to wake up and realize the person we needed was here all along." Her eyes shimmered with quiet emotion. "I thought I'd lost the courage to love again. But maybe loving you was never about again. Maybe it just grew up, along with the scars we carried." He smiled, voice steady and full of warmth. "Then this time, let me be the one to protect that love, for both of us." Weeks later, Elena began her new position as art director at the Carter Art Center. Each morning, as she walked through the grand glass doors, she still couldn't believe how life had come full circle. From a modest art teacher to standing amidst exhibitions glowing with hope and patience, her own work among them. At the grand opening, people noticed Liam standing quietly in the back of the hall. He said nothing, only smiled when the spotlight fell on one particular painting, Second Chances. In the corner of that canvas, Elena had added another line, "To the man who taught me that love never leaves. It just waits for the right time." Applause filled the room. Elena turned, and across the crowd their eyes met. No words, no gestures, just a small nod, and that was enough. After all these years, they had finally found each other again. That night they walked by the river. The breeze was cool, the lights glittering on the water like broken stars. "Elena," Liam said softly, "I used to think success meant having everything. But standing at the top, I only felt empty. Until I found you again." She leaned gently on his shoulder. "I thought I'd lost you forever. But maybe you just took the long way, back to where you were meant to be." They both laughed quietly. No grand promises, no tears, just two people who had survived loss and learned to stay, finally side by side. The narrator's voice grew gentle, reflective. "Sometimes we have to lose each other once, to learn how to love the right way. No rush, no demands, just two hands held together, moving forward even if slowly." They stopped midway across the bridge. Elena looked up, her voice soft as the wind. "You once said you'd come back when you had everything. But Liam, I never needed you to have everything. I just needed you to come back," he smiled, tightening his hand around hers. "And for me, it was enough that you were still here." She rested her head on his shoulder as the city lights shimmered around them, warm, steady, and full of quiet joy. The night in Seattle was still, but in their hearts a new chapter had begun. The story of Elena and Liam was never a fairy tale. There was no magic, no sparkling happily ever after. It was simply the story of two people who once loved, lost each other, and then found their way back when both had finally grown enough to understand that true love isn't about finding the perfect person. It's about choosing to stay, even after everything has been broken. They didn't return to each other as the reckless lovers of their youth, but as two souls who had learned the weight and worth of loss. Because only after walking through loneliness do we realize how precious it is to have someone who chooses to stay. Elena once believed that time had taken everything from her, her youth, her dreams, her faith. But no, time only took away what was shallow and left behind what was real. That some loves don't need to burn bright. They just need to endure, quietly, gently, enough to make us live a little softer. As for Liam, he once thought he needed success to prove his worth. But standing at the peak of his empire, he finally understood. It all meant nothing if there was no one to share it with. Money could buy him a building, but it could never buy back the gaze of the woman who once believed in him when he had nothing. And so, on quiet Seattle nights, they sat together. No vows, no grandeur, no noise. Just 2 cups of coffee, a faint smile, and hands that never let go. Because sometimes happiness isn't about starting over, but continuing with the same person in a better version of yourselves. In this life, we all go through seasons of being lost, but there will always be someone who, no matter how far you've gone, remains the one whose name makes your heart smile softly. Not because you still love them, but because you know, once you truly did, with the purest part of yourself. And if one day you happen to meet again the person who once made your heart tremble, don't turn away. Maybe it's not for a new beginning, but simply to say, thank you for being my youth. So if you ever find yourself wandering through life, missing someone who once walked beside you, remember this. True love never disappears. It simply waits for you in a different version of who you've become. And sometime, the one who once hurt you is also the one who will teach you how to love the right way. Not as the naive souls you once were, but as two hearts that have finally learned to cherish instead of possess.